All right, hello. You guys can't see my. Is this Dark Thoughts? No, this is just special road edition of 511 Thoughts, right? So I want to talk. So I'm responding once again. I mean, most of my things are response, whatever. Take it. Oh, you can see a little bit of my face now. It's interesting, right? Did the camera do that or what? I don't know. It's interesting. All right, so I want to talk today about. We're gonna try to do 10 minutes about I don't think I've explicitly addressed this before here, so we're branching off into new topics. So I want to talk about just kind of reflect and express some thoughts on sort of I guess I'll say being single, but I guess I would also be sort of romance. I think in the last video, right, in the last car ride, I'm always driving, right? It's always the drive. I talked about how I was a hopeless romantic, right? I was a romantic that's hopeless, seemingly hopeless, not ready to sort of attach the hopeless on there, right? Ready to attach the romantic all the time, right? But it's interesting because I'd be curious to know people's reaction to that, right? But one thing that's interesting is that whether you based your opinion off of that or not, right? You might have thought, well, is this guy sort of single? Is this guy sort of is this guy what's the deal with this guy? I mean, you probably said this guy this guy doesn't get chicks, etc. I don't know. But believe it or not, I'm actually not. I actually have. It's one of those little complicated relationships. I don't know if I talked about that already. But it's interesting because as you can see my face now, right? No, but it's interesting because So, do I consider myself like on the market, right? Probably not, right? In other words, like the sorts of relationships that I'm in are, sort of things that I think, and it's complicated, and I think it's sufficiently complicated for my sort of sometimes viney mind, and then also sort of just to sort of fulfill what I kind of, in other words, like, do I feel fulfilled, right? That's the question I want to ask. So let's talk about, though, but anyway, but my point is to say that, like, you look at me, right, and I'm someone who is, whatever, X, right, whatever you want to call me. But, apparently there's this idea, there's this sort of, in the popular media, there is, sort of like, well, most people are single nowadays. I grew up, as a student, right? I think I've expressed this as a student, who was always interested in statistics, right? I was always interested in, sort of trends. I think I talked negatively about trends, but I'm always interested in them, right? I'm always interested to see sort of what's going on in the world. And the way you do that is sort of take statistics, etc. Lies, damn lies, and statistics, so you never know. But I think, the point is that you hope that you can get some picture of what's going on. I can say that, there's sort of this idea that, sort of this traditional marriage is, going by the wayside, right? A lot of the sort of traditions are going by the wayside. It's interesting because what's always interesting is, like, the notion of tradition itself followed by sort of the dissolution of tradition. In other words, the question we sort of presume is that the existence of the tradition was entrenched within society itself, and then we're sort of taking it away, when it could be the entrenchment is what's really sort of the suspect feature of this whole thing, right? I don't know. But the point is that I know for myself, right, when I was in school, people were like sort of dating, quote unquote, in like third grade. And it was like, oh, or maybe even early, maybe second grade. I can't, but I remember it was always like sort of class pairs, et cetera, et cetera. Like, he's going out with him. Will you go out with me? That's interesting. I never went out, I don't know. I never went out. I didn't go out. Anyway, but it's interesting because there was sort of this idea, right? And it's sort of like, oh, the idea is that people sort of pair up, etc., etc. And certainly, like I said, to me, like, and I have to say, real or not, in other words, like, whatever you might say about romance, I contend, as I contended last time, it is sort of the one thing in life. I mean, in other words, like, my experience of life, there's not much else that can be so fulfilling than romance, in my opinion, right? And I would have to, if I had to attribute the sort of cause for that, I would attribute it to be, I'm coughing as I say this. What am I doing? No, but if I had to attribute the cause, I would say it's obviously some sort of like, pheromones, sort of natural drive to sort of, make babies, right? I mean, I don't know. I would imagine, right? I mean, there's probably, you guys think I talk about too basic stuff? That's what I don't know. Sometimes I think like, it's sort of like, well, no, duh, but it's interesting because let's follow the stuff out, right? Like, let's say, given that this is sort of the one thing in life that I think, like I said, like, you make a list of stuff like that makes life worth living. And I think that, in my opinion, like, I don't, if you don't like romance, if you don't, notice that romance is a very sort of open-ended thing, right? Like, you can technically have romance with your computer, but it is what it is. But, I think that romance is very, but the point is that if you don't like romance, that's kind of, that's your prerogative, right? But I'm just saying for myself, there are a few things in life, right? Even like sort of, late night drives into the woods to go to some haunted house, right? That is probably infinitely better with someone there beside you. And I know that as I sort of, I'm sort of alone right now and I'm missing my loved ones. I truly am. But I think it's interesting because, life is better with a partner, right? My point in all of this is to say that, like, it's interesting because there is sort of this idea, though, that, nowadays sort of people are going less and less with love or romance, etc. And then we sort of get into the idea as well, like, we start attaching blame, or we sort of start, forming images of people who are sort of the prototypical perpetrators of this sort of trend, right? And I'm talking here about sort of incels, right? So we sort of say, well, an incel is someone who is, for whatever reason, unable to attract a female. And then I think what's interesting is that I think the sort of true definition of incel incorporates the notion of a sort of hatred or sort of misogyny toward women, right? So in other words, I think if you just can't get chicks, but like you actually you're actually kind of like a nice guy, which a lot of people would say that's probably why you can't get chicks. But I think if you can't get chicks plus nice guy means not an incel. I would say, I don't know, like, I don't care about calling people incels, but I think it's interesting because I would argue that the people who are most affected by not getting girls are probably those nice guys. Now, I don't know the extent to which, like I said, I don't know the actual statistic. To me, like, the misogynists are more likely to, put on, in other words, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, they don't evoke sympathy, but I think they also they're less likely to actually, like, truly be hurt by not getting females, right? I think if you're misogynistic, then I think, in other words, like, if we were to say an incel is one of two people, right? An incel can either be nice, not girls, and then not nice and not girls. And the not nice might be somewhat because they don't have a sort of empathy gene or whatever. Then I think the true incel, the not nice, because they're not nice, they're probably not affected by it as much, right? Like, they'll put it on, but they'll put it on the basis of sort of this expectation type of thing. All of this to say, it's interesting because we sort of take this phenomenon and we sort of condense it down into an image of something, right? And what's interesting to me is that, I don't know. Like, it's not clear to me that a few bad eggs is sort of what's actually going on here or not, right? I know that, to me, I know that, I think it's more difficult. Like, in other words, like, I do think that we pay way more attention to somebody's innate worth, right? And a lot of people use terms like emotional intelligence or what do you hear? I mean, there's the claim that, like, all you have to do is work and, like, be productive, and that's clearly, like I said, I don't, like, most nice guys are, and I don't know why I'm taking the bat for most, because I consider myself to be a nice guy. I don't, like I said, I don't consider myself to be an incel, by any definition of incel. I think I personally have too high standards, but that's another story. The point is that what I'm trying to say here is that it's interesting because we talk about, like, I would love, one of the reasons why I'm so obsessed with sort of the past. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I am sort of so obsessed about the past because, to me, the sort of image of the past, right? And, like I said, we create, I feel like, the way we understand the world is through images, right? And what I mean by images is sort of, you might say memes, or you might say, like, the term incel, right? The sort of dating world is full of incels who are just angry, right? And that's sort of the image that you have, and that, those are the people that, don't get the girls. And I think the image of the past, though, is sort of this, it seemed like it was much easier, right? In other words, like, it seems like in the past, there was no trouble. Like to me, what the most amazing thing about our modern society is that there's this idea of dating apps, right? And it's gotten to the point where, like, most people are like, the answer to dating is on dating apps. And it's so amazing to me because it's like, wait a minute, are you telling me that this is how you have to date now? Right? Like, like literally 30 years ago, right? The generation sort of before me, they didn't even know what dating apps were, right? They had no idea. They didn't even have the concept of the internet. And it's sort of like, it's interesting that, it becomes this sort of virtual reality that we get in for our love life that I would have to imagine that, 100 years ago was sort of, one of those things that just sort of occurred, right? And it was, no one cared about how ugly you were, right? Like, maybe they did. Like I said, this is my image. This is what my conception of the past, the sort of image that I got is that I think, you talk about, I think it's interesting because, you look at the turn of the 20th century as sort of the turning point of, in my perception of things, a sort of awareness of sort of different sort of photogenic qualities. I think, in other words, you might say that the photograph was sort of the turning point to all dating, right? The sort of, in other words, that sort of prompted dating in general, but it also sort of meant the end for, imagine the photograph meaning the end for men, right? Wouldn't that be interesting? Because nowadays, everybody's sort of pinpoint, photograph, film, internet, dating websites, that's your thing, right? You want a girlfriend, you have to go to a dating website. To me, that's totally ridiculous. And it's interesting, but, that's sort of the thing because we're so hyper aware of, our cheekbones or, something like that. Like I said, it could be in the past that, there was sort of this idea, you might be that, it might be an array of factors. I think it's interesting to see. And like I said, I think, in my opinion, I think that the sort of the closeness that we have to each other is part and parcel with the sort of higher selection, right? So in other words, like, back in the day, you would be very far apart to certain people that, maybe you were far apart to for a reason. And so it's sort of like the people in your sort of physical spatial proximity were the people that were most likely to sort of get with you anyway because they were sort of, related to you in a lot of different ways, right? So that's interesting. But it is interesting. And I guess I just like, this was a video with a lot of pauses because I think you do get emotional here. But one thing that's interesting to me is that there's sort of this idea that, you know, it seems like dating has become a sort of social obligation, right? And I think that sort of brings to where, you know, I get the sense that, you know, whether it's put on or not, like I said, I'm just taking things at face value here, but you get the sense that, like, women feel almost obligated to date, and they feel guilty about not dating, but they don't really want to date, right? And, you know, my understanding would be that I don't think women would ever want to date. I think the expectation is the men are the ones who actually want the romance. You know, the women are sort of just, they'll receive the attention and be happy with it, right? So sort of like women receive, men put out. So, but the point is that all of this to say, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think it's very interesting because, you know, you wonder, you know, like I said, I think about maybe like 5 to 10 years ago, the word incel came out as sort of being really popular. You don't hear it as much anymore, so I don't know if, you know, sort of the idea of the incel has sort of evaporated because maybe there was sort of a correction process for that. You know, you always talk about, you know, we sort of do something and then you know, I'm looking at the dating market like as maybe a stock market. I don't know. But the point is that there's always sort of like a correction. You know, you sort of, you know, you do something and then there's the correction, the sort of ripple effect. I don't know, you know, if people are not happy or happy. I don't, you know, I can't say. I know for myself, you know, being in a relationship as well, you know, being in a complicated relationship, I think you don't come around those circles, which is another point, right? It's sort of like, well, you know, if I don't hear about it, if I don't hear the locker closing, the locker doesn't close, right? Or the, you know, the tree doesn't fall in the forest if I don't hear about it. So it's interesting. I don't know, you know, maybe we just need another Elliot Rodgers or something. I don't know, you know, but it is interesting. And I think, but one thing that I am interested in is sort of this idea that, you know, people match now through dating websites. The extent to which that is a reality or that is sort of myth, you know, myth or reality, I don't know. That's why we need, right, statistics, right, and good statistics, I don't know. But, all right, but anyway, this is an interesting 511 thoughts, for me at least. And yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye.